Well, welcome. Amazing to have you all here this afternoon. So delighted to be spending some time with you to explore the topic of women in leadership. I know a topic that's important to each of you, and really looking forward to having your shared experiences, your lived experiences, the journey that you've been on around this topic. We had a Women in Leadership Roundtable previously, and very much focused on the power of advocacy and how we can really cultivate men as allies. And I think that's still a topic that we'd love to hear more of, but also free to take it in a direction that absolutely can help us build more understanding and more of what we can do together to shape a better world for women in leadership, women in sport. And it's great today. We got a context from a sporting point of view and a business point of view. And I think that perspective, how we can learn from different worlds, is always something that's really interesting. So I'm going to pass over to Lucia first. If you could do an introduction to yourself, and why is this topic important to you?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. My name is Lucia Marcuzzo. I'm currently in Belgium. This is my living room. Welcome. And I've been working for Levi Strauss Company for the past 10 years. I'm the managing director for North Europe. North Europe is one of the clusters in Europe, one of the 3 clusters. So I'm the head for Germany and the UK, Benelux, and Austria, Switzerland, so continental Europe. I've been in the company for the past 10 years. Before this role, I've been in retail. I've led large retail organizations, and I moved here in Brussels with my whole family, with my son, with my husband, for my job, following my career, and I'm pleased to say that it turned out to be one of the best decisions in my life. I'm very passionate about leadership and women leadership in specific. I think first of all, I'm a woman. I'm in a leadership position, in a responsibility in a large company. I always knew I wanted to take a leadership position, but I think I matured a bit more the awareness of how important it is to have to bring your authentic voice to the table, and how important it is to have a different representation and diversity in leadership positions across all sector, and not only from a professional point of view, but also from more a personal point of view. So I'm really interested in the topic, and I've been privileged to be here, and I want in a way also to give back, if possible, to other women that want to follow a similar career.
Thank you. That's brilliant to hear. I'll pass over to Audrey.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Audrey Cooper, and I work for the Football Association in England. And I've been in the role of head of women's coach development for the last 4 years, and that role is around women's football specifically, and how we can develop coaches, both male and female, but with a big emphasis on normalizing women in coaching. So it's a real passion I have, so that it's not, oh crumbs, we've got a woman coaching. It becomes something that is normal, and that of course talks about women in leadership positions in football as well. I'm fortunate to work in an organization where we do have a number of females in leadership positions, but out in football clubs, for example, it's still very much a minority. So I'm really keen to explore and work within the whole world of football in terms of how can we get more females in those leadership positions. And in a previous life, I was a coach. I was a coach of a volleyball team, actually. So my sport is actually volleyball. So I was a GB coach at volleyball. And so I've been through a different kind of journey myself in terms of getting into a leadership position in coaching. And then prior to that, I worked in business. So I was in a leadership position in business for 3M. And a kind of marketing type role. So yeah, that's a bit of background, but I'm just incredibly passionate about normalizing women across coaching and leadership. And I think there's just so much women can offer, and a different perspective that a woman can bring alongside a male perspective, which was what Lucia talked about. I think that it's just incredible to get that blend. I think in business and in sport will just advance leadership. So yeah, really excited about being here today.
Great. As a woman in coaching, I'm also very passionate and always look to the great work that you're doing, Audrey, in this world. And Patrick.
Hi, good morning, afternoon, whenever you're watching this, wherever you are. My name is Patrick McMaster and I wear 3 hats. So predominantly I'm an executive coach, so I work with individuals and to help them define their goals and fulfill their potential, whatever those may be. But I also wear 2 other hats. So one of them is I work on some really huge mentoring programs for women. And so, you know, hundreds of participants, international programs, either cross-sector or within companies to support female development in organizations. And then I also do work in organizations helping teams and leaders, you know, perform at their potential as well. So coaching, mentoring and leadership development. And I have 3 daughters. And the reason that I got, I suppose, really heavily interested in this space is because I don't see the world of work as equal at this time, and that saddens me. And so I'm doing, I suppose, not everything I can, but I'm doing an awful lot that I can, if that makes sense, to make a small difference. And I'm not here to speak on behalf of all men or to speak for all men, although I am a man, so I'm happy to give that perspective. And so I'm really pleased to be here with you today.
And I've got the privilege of working with Patrick as part of the Leading Edge Team Coach group that we're all part of, and the privilege of always hearing your insights in this area. It always gives me lots of inspiration. So I'm going to just put a question to you, and I suppose maybe I'll start with you, Audrey. Was there like a powerful experience or something that's really shaped you, you know, a point in time in your journey that shaped you to this? Because I think oftentimes this becomes like a life purpose. It is a real drive at that level. What's really brought you to where you were? Was there some junction in your journey that this became something that absolutely I'm going to go down this road? Because it's not an easy one at times.
No, it's certainly not an easy one, but it's something that gets me out of bed every day, to be honest, to really drive this agenda, if you like. But I think when I came to the end of my coaching career and realized, and it's only on reflection, you think about maybe some of the struggles, you think about all the fantastic experiences and how rewarding it was. But there were some struggles, and I think being a female in a very male-dominated environment, I just got me really reflecting and asking why that was. So I think when the opportunity came up to work in women's football, which I love football, and to make a difference, and the fact that it was growing, it seemed like what a great opportunity to work with a sport that's forward thinking or becoming more forward thinking, and really embracing women's football. What a fantastic chance and a platform to get more women into coaching. And we had some coaches, but we hadn't really paid that many attention to the female coaches. So that was a moment, I think, where I realized that was my journey lucky? Were the people who helped me? It just really got me reflecting when I came to the end of being a coach, that how could I make this as enjoyable experience as I had, but maybe not quite so difficult? What are the barriers that are there that we could help, you know, break down to make the opportunities more open for women to get into coaching, rather than, can women coach? Boy, they can coach. So some of it is about influencing. I think my role was a big influencing role. So I think it was probably at the end of my personal journey that made me think, right, I think that this is maybe harder than I thought it was. And how might we make it a rewarding, but maybe a slightly easier journey for other women to get into coaching?
And Lucia, when we talked, you talked about your journey, you know, stepping into the world of Levi's, and actually you've been on quite a journey from maybe something that wasn't so purposeful, something that started as an acorn of an idea, to actually a much more intentful, purposeful journey around women in leadership, gender, and beyond, you know, in terms of what you're looking to do now. Would you just maybe bring to life a little bit of that journey?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one important moment of my career was when I think I first took a role, a leadership role, a large leadership role, because at that point, you know, I was head of one function, of planning function, and there was an opportunity, a vacancy. My boss, you know, moved into a new role, and the boss of my boss actually came to me and offered me the job. And in that moment, I didn't see myself being able to step in that role, and he saw something in me that was beyond my ambition or imagination, and that gave me a level of, I don't know, such a boost. It was, you know, like an eye opener, and I always remember that moment. And I thought, you know, I think, you know, leadership is also has to be with how you see other people, and, you know, where is their potential, and have a vision that is larger than maybe what they can even think about. And wow, I would like to do the same with other people. And so this was an interesting idea that was, you know, was in there. And then when I joined Levi's has a long history of, you know, being really a value-driven company. There's a lot of attention for diversity and inclusion. But recently in Europe, it took a more structured shape, and you know, we started the journey on putting together a leadership program, a much more, you know, purposeful development program for other women. It happened a bit casually with other women in my peers, you know, and then, you know, in the past 3-4 years, it grew and it became much more structured. And I have to say that every time we had the opportunity to put women together and create network, talk about, you know, the roadblock, share experiences, I saw how much interest and really curiosity and commitment there was to, you know, and benefit across the board to elevate this discussion. So it gave me really, again, the confidence that is the right thing to do, and it enriches the conversation and the performance, very frankly, within you know, within the group, within the team. So I think is definitely a journey that is worth embarking on.
And Patrick, I know you talked about obviously a dad of 3 daughters, and life choices you've made as a family seem to have really been part of your journey. Do you want to bring some of that to life for us?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. It's really interesting hearing how different people have a different trigger that's inspired them to be really, really committed to this area. So my wife and I, my wife's a scientist. She works for the Environment Agency and has a full and, you know, very fulfilling career. And when we had 3 children under 5, we both made the decision that the only way to cope and survive, really, was for both of us to work part-time. So in 2010, I started working part-time, and I worked in a large global telecoms company at that time. So people like 3 and O2 and BlackBerry, so that kind of environment. And we decided that I would work 4 days a week and she would work 3 days a week. And that meant that, to be perfectly frank, the day that I wasn't at work was Thursday. So I dropped the kids at school, I picked them up from school, I cooked tea. It was the best day of the week, to be honest. And what was interesting is that was the only way we could manage in the holidays. So we had 2 days a week, the Tuesday and the Wednesday, where we didn't have child cover. But otherwise, between me and her, we could cover it and we could make it work. And what was really interesting was the surprise from other men when I talked about what I did. I mean, there's complete shock and disbelief in 2010 that someone would choose to work part-time as a man. Clearly, for women, it was okay for them to work part-time, but not for men. And so I found that quite shocking. And I must admit, there's a price you pay for making that decision. But I have to say, when I add up all the pros and all the cons of making that decision and doing that for the rest of my career, I absolutely don't regret it for a second. And it was absolutely the right decision for me personally, for my wife, and for our family. It doesn't mean it's all perfect. We just did our best to muddle through. And what's really interesting, I did a session at one of the big 5 consultancies last year where they invited me to talk about being a part-time working man. And the younger men in that organization, who are very ambitious and very successful, they wanted a flexible working world with whatever they had going on. It didn't have to be for kids, it could be for lots of reasons. But it was really interesting that that generation were expecting to have a better deal than perhaps our parents, and where it was the man was working all the time and the wife might have been at home, or whatever the setup might have been, a much more traditional. So that's what really put me on the path to this particular space. And more recently I worked in the sports industry, so in rugby, not football, with people off the pitch. But it was really interesting in a culture that's quite male dominated. When you talk about working part-time, some men now more recently go, yeah, I'd love that actually, why can't I do that? Whereas 10 years ago that was definitely not the case.
It's really interesting, that trigger aspect, and a lot of research shows that actually when men do have, dads do have daughters, it often is that trigger. And I know there was a campaign in Australia which was Daughter Water, where they sent branded bottles of water to fathers to start getting them to think about actually changing the narrative and giving greater opportunity. I believe there's some campaign, Patrick, you were talking about as well, is it Fathers for Daughters, and the work the UN have been doing on this shift of gender equality? Yeah,
there's a lot of debate about unconscious bias and the tests and the validity and the usefulness of them. And so many years ago, I did a Dads for Daughters unconscious bias test, which basically looked to see if you were sexist, and that's what it did. And they sent it to dads and men, and typically, ideally, aiming at CEOs of big companies and all the rest of it. And I think it gives men real insight into where their biases are. And so I think when people really stop and think about what their purpose is in their life, and I feel quite fortunate to have a purpose, I'm pretty clear on what my purpose is. My purpose is to be the best dad and the best husband and the best person that I can be. And I don't always succeed at that, to be frank. Plenty of times I don't have a great day on that front, but if I just make progress each day or each week on that purpose. And so interventions like unconscious bias testing are very controversial now, but have been used a lot in the last 10 years or so. And I think, Sarah, when I think about the wider diversity and inclusion agenda, where we're looking at black women in coaching or in sport, or looking at gay women in coaching or in sport or in business, and we start to look at those kind of amplifiers, then I think it becomes even more important that we're doing this work. And I see myself as a feminist, and I'm proud of that, but also I think it's now about more than that. It's a much wider question about being a truly diverse and inclusive organisation on every level for all the protected characteristics.
And Audrey, when you think about sport and football, and do you feel that there's a real shift of awareness that's really happening? Obviously, the FA has really got behind this. What's been at the heart of what's kind of driving that awareness, and then driving the success to see that turning into a shift in some of those, more women are coaching on the side of, on the football pitch? And yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think there's many drivers for why we're heading in that direction. And I think, Sarah, when we've spoken previously, there's clearly lots of talk in this area, isn't there? And lots of great talk. And we're here today really, pushing this agenda again. But I think it's been taking action now. And it's one of the things I'm really proud to be working for the FA, is that we've identified that we want to have more women in coaching football, not just in women's football, which is the area I look after, but right across the game, because the figures are staggering, really staggering. 8% of coaches across the whole of football are women. I mean, wow. The population in the UK is more or less 50-50, and you think, why is that? So I think we've taken a stance to say, right, we're going to really drive this agenda and get a workforce behind getting more women into coaching. And then picking up what Patrick was saying, it's not just women, we're also looking at Black and Asian coaches. So we've looked at, again, creating a workforce to identify coaches, and not just at the top of the game, right through the whole system. So those that are volunteer coaches, those that see it as a career, how do we get more Black and Asian coaches into the game? And it's front and center in all of our strategic drivers to get behind it, because we believe that it will make a difference. We want it to be representative of our society. I mean, that's again a big sweeping statement and just words, but we're trying to put action behind that. And I think there are a number of coaches out there that haven't quite put their hands up because they don't think it's maybe for them, or they've not seen it. So role models for us is playing a huge part in you know, unearthing and giving confidence to when you see another woman, or you see someone like you, whether you are Black, Asian, female, gay, you see someone, you think that could be me one day. So I think role models are certainly playing a big part of the work that we're doing. But we're also having to nudge people. And I'd be really interested in the others' views on this. I use this as a strategy. And when we say nudge, it might be just like a little gentle push towards, you know, just helping women see that, yeah, I could do this. There are other women doing it. And a bit like we were saying earlier, somebody else maybe sees something in you that you don't see in yourself. So I feel that part of our strategy is helping nudge people to say, I can do this.
I'm interested as well, Lucia, when we talked around, there is resistance to when you started putting a lot of the women in leadership programs into place. There is resistance, but not just from men, from women too. How do you go about sort of overcoming some of that resistance, or where are you on that journey?
Yeah, I think, yes. So as I said, the journey in Europe in my company started more actively a few years ago when we decided within the women leadership group to do something to address a bit the gender imbalance. And even if LS & Co is a very, you know, open company and culture, still you see the numbers, and women's at leadership and executive level are less in proportion than an entry level, right? And they are a bit below the population representation. So I mean, we start with actually over-indexing at entry, contributor and professional level, and then when you get to executive, the proportion is not there anymore. So we said, okay, let's do something, and we started with, you know, creating an event. And we wanted this event with women in the company across all countries to be a sort of a, you know, learning lab, to hear from women what do they need to develop. So we had immediately the sponsorship from our president. I think this made it happen, really. So endorsement from the top helps. However, there were some resistance, and not outspoken, but, you know, more questions about why are we doing this for women, and should we not just address talents in general. And funny enough, during the first conference, there were many women feeling a bit uncomfortable that this was a women-only event, or you know, that, you know, feeling, I don't know, a bit guilty. and you know, it was, first of all, it was a good learning. And so we had to shape a bit the narrative about, you know, there are maybe some roadblocks that goes in the way of women, sometimes self-inflicted as well, to be honest, that are not going in the way of men, and we need to be aware. And then change a bit the narrative in terms of, it's not about, you know, women leadership, is about gender balance, to make sure, you know, it's about talent in the first place, but it's also about representing different point of and voices, right? I think it's a journey where, you know, you need to get comfortable and understanding that doing something for women doesn't mean taking anything away from others. And at the same time, there are different, you know, different kind of diversity, you know, is sexual orientation, is ethnicity, is different abilities. So I think is trying to unite behind the concept of diversity in the first place, but inclusion even more important, right? Because at some point, you know, you can create diversity, but if you don't give space and voice, and it's not going to change the game so much. But I mean, I'm a bit pragmatic, and I've been pushing it together with my female colleagues and say, okay, you know what, maybe it's not the best thing in absolute. Maybe it's not going to be perfect. Maybe, yes, we will do something for men, but now let's do this thing for women and learn out of it and be happy with it. I mean, it's never going to be perfect. I mean, sometimes done is better than perfect.
I think there's so many cultural narratives that we all have to just put up in front of us and actually make a choice about them, because they do run at sort of a subconscious real, because, you know, they're coded in culture, they're coded in how we're brought up, and we do need to make conscious choices. And I think it's really interesting looking at men as allies. One of the key things for that success is to make sure that when you do invite men into that world, they do feel accepted and also have a sense of belonging and safety. So the same inclusive principle applies. And I think
Absolutely.
how you contract that initially is probably really important to that. And we're learning as we go in these cases as well. So
yes.
Sarah, you know, that point itself and how it's so interesting that you said it that way. We have to make sure that they're accepted and that sense of belonging. And then if I put my hat on, you know, when I worked in business and I went into a boardroom full of males, I certainly didn't feel accepted or belonging. So it's really interesting how we as females are thinking that we have to make sure we accepted. Not that we would do the reverse of that, by the way, but isn't it interesting that we're thinking of that at the forefront? So yeah, it's that just intrigued me and took me back quite a few years when I went into many environments and I thought, oh my goodness, I definitely feel like they're one left out or not belonging. So I think part of the bit about bringing men and women together is you need to take people on a journey with you, don't you? And that's what I took from what Lucia was saying there, that they may not have been fully embedded, but they're hearing, you know, the challenges that women are facing, and generally women want to help each other, like really help each other. That peer-to-peer thing I've found with the programs we've run is just so powerful. But then you can, when you bring the men into it, it adds another dimension and another way and another perspective. So I think it's a great point that Lucia's made around how do you bring the male into the environment so that they feel a part of that journey and become active allies, not just allies, like really active. So yeah, really interesting.
I think, and it may be just my hypothesis, that due to the pandemic and due to what's happened over the last 12 months, I think society has moved on so quickly. And I think what was socially acceptable, you know, 5, 10, 15 years ago is no longer socially acceptable in many areas. So I think in a way we need to, I suppose, not catch up, but we need to recognize that the world's changed really quickly. And actually the expectation is now that equality is a default. But the current processes and the current systems and the current, I suppose, people in those positions are not, you know, gender equal, if you like, the gender balance. So I think it's really interesting that the doors are now fully open, I think. And I think the expectation is for diverse boards and diverse teams and diverse, you know, groups, and anything else would look embarrassingly so last century. So I think that's one point, and I think the space is there. I think the other thing is I'm really conscious of the generalizations that we're making about men and women. And so it's really difficult to talk about this subject without doing it. But even now, when you look at the younger generation, it's not as binary as we might be describing it as men and women. And there's much more of a blurred space in the middle where people might identify with male traits and female traits. And so I think it's just really interesting that I see it as a spectrum, you know, masculinity and femininity. And as a man, I have a lot of feminine traits, lots of emotional intelligence, a lot of empathy. And then there are plenty of women with a lot of more masculine traits, you know, more drive and, you know, delivery focus perhaps. So I think it's sometimes, I'm just conscious of us talking about men and women, making it seem like we're two different species, but actually, you know, we're the same species. We just have slightly different, you know, parts, if you like. So in terms of what's worked, Sarah, and to answer your question, I think there's a few things. So because society shifted on, I think that culture changes one conversation at a time. And it's a really simple thing that I picked up many years ago working in culture change in big organizations. And someone says, you know, what about all the big action plan? And it's not the big action plan. It's not the biggest, it's one conversation at a time. And I can tell you just in the last 5 years, you know, I had a really uncomfortable conversation last year with someone very dear to me, which I considered to be a racist comment they made. And I said, I'm afraid I can no longer engage in a conversation with you if you're using that sort of language. And 10 years ago, when I became more committed to my daughters and the world changing, I had a conversation with some of my friends in a curry house where sexist comments were made, and I just said, I can't have this conversation with you. You have a daughter. I don't think it's okay for you to talk like that anymore. And that's deeply uncomfortable, to talk to one of your close friends and say you're not happy with the way that they're talking about a particular topic. So in terms of men, I think men need to listen a lot more. If I have some advice for men, if it's okay to share some advice for men, I think men need to listen a lot more. I think men need to speak up. And I would say when men are speaking up as allies of women, I think they just need to think about, does this make sense? What do they believe in? And what's their gut telling them? Is this okay? Is this right? Or do they need to speak up now?
That's really powerful. And I love it as well. It is those micro actions. It is that one conversation at a time. And it is that support, that sort of sponsorship, that you have somebody's back along those journeys and you're going to advocate for them and support them. And I think you touch on, you talked about, language and, gender and how maybe some of the stereotypes, unfortunately, they still do exist. Certainly in the world of coaching, women are seen to be more nurturing and caring, and men are more tactical and decisive and risk-taking. All the research and business, they're similar things. So I really love the idea of like normalizing women in coaching and changing the narrative, so that actually we do start changing some of these deep-rooted sort of embedded narratives that do exist. And so when you think about that, Audrey, I know this is a topic, that idea of normalizing women in coaching. What do you think is the most important thing that we can really do to shift that dial over time? And it's not something we can do today or tomorrow. It's probably something that's going to take us on a journey.
Yeah, definitely. And talking to what you were just saying there, Sarah, and what Patrick was saying about, we have traits, we have characteristics, there are things that we're maybe naturally good at, or in the way in which we're brought up. And then there are traits and stuff that we can learn. So the whole piece around normalizing women in coaching, we did a piece of research to begin with to understand what females bring to coaching. But we did the research just to look at coaching. What is effective coaching in women's football? And that came back and gave us a whole host of information in terms of how girls perceive their coaches, both male and female. So a lot of the traits that Patrick was talking about and you've said are associated with women, but we can develop those traits in males. Some will come with it and some won't, and vice versa. So understanding what we do really well, how can we dial it up, and the areas where we maybe it's not natural, or it's a trait that we maybe can develop, or not a skill, a characteristic and a trait. How can we support the development of that? Because I think there will be stereotypes, but I think there's opportunity, there's room for movement and room for change and growth. And so that's really at the heart of our approach, and taking men as well as women on this journey is really, really important. When we've got a program where we're working on at the moment, it's called Transformational Coaching, and it's coming out of this research, and we're calling them think spaces. And we're going to talk about what the game has told us about what good coaching looks like. And quite a lot of it is that emotional intelligence and that skill and that interpersonal skills, but also the motivation as well, and being direct. So there's a whole host of skills that we're looking at, and traits, and how we develop them. And the program will be open to our male coaching workforce and our female. So we go on the journey together. I've got horror stories of coaches that turn up to matches, and the referee or the person at the ground goes, "Oh, the physio room's over there," and they just associate the female as being the physio and not the head coach. So we've got a way to go. And I love that phrase, micro actions, by the way. I'm going to steal that. I think that's just so nice, because it's the small things, the small steps we'll take, and they'll feel small now, but I think they will be big. They're going to have a big impact.
And I think that idea of getting to a place of a narrative, like what is good coaching? And then actually people can see themselves in that, whether that's a woman, a Black coach, we can see ourselves in this. And at the moment, coaching is seen as a certain thing, whereas actually coming up with a fresh and understanding actually what is good coaching, and this is based on what we know, and bringing everyone on that journey is there. I have often been asked as a coach, was I the manager? And it still goes on today. We will change that. And Lucia, I'm really interested in like thinking of your sort of even personal journey as a leader and the support that you've got. And I suppose it's that, you know, we talk about mentorship programs. We also talk about having, you know, a sponsor, a real sort of advocate for you you talked about that, you know, leader that saw beyond you as well. How do you think, you know, that support has really helped you to, you know, flourish and become the leader that you are, you know, within Levi's?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, you know, support is key. I was really, I mean, resonated very much what Patrick said. I mean, when I joined Levi's, I moved, an example, from Italy to Belgium. I just had a baby. He was 4 months old, was not sleeping very much. I had a new job in a new company, in a new country, in a new house, and no network of family. And my husband resigned to you know, to follow me in my job, but then because we had a project together, right? And you know, it was, you know, he was my #1 sponsor and support, and I wouldn't, you know, it would have been much harder without such a great support. And I think, you know, this made us even stronger together. So he was my first support. But then at work, I think, you know, finding inspiring leaders, taking care and sharing their stories. And I think, you know, yes, leading by example it's true. I mean, you have to see different role models, and you have to, you know, be able to see yourself in those roles. This helps. And then I think you also need to be able to ask for support. I mean, that's the other piece, right? Where I think you mature and you become aware that support is, you know, showing vulnerability doesn't mean to be weak or to be not able, or, you know, to be, I don't know, whatever. I think, you know, being aware, being mature to ask support and create the network. You know, those leadership events that we started, and now they evolved into something different, not so general and open and sporadic. But those leadership events, the other thing we understood very clearly from these women that we invited to participate was, first of all, network and being aware that you are not the only one that, you know, has some doubts and struggles and questions. It's important, so network. And then the one thing that they were all asking for was, you know, mentorship. And definitely mentorship is relevant, is probably the top ask we got. But together with mentorship, there is an element of sponsorship.
Audrey, I know you're doing a lot of work on succession planning and thinking about your pool of talent in a much more purposeful way. Can you just shed some light on that focus that is kind of the next phase of your journey now?
Yeah, it is, Sarah. We often talk in sport about player pathways and talent ID for players. So I was really conscious that that's what I've kind of lived through for the last 10 or 15 years, and thought, why don't we have something similar in coaching? Now, maybe some organizations are doing that, but we certainly weren't doing it in football. And it was just really, it feels like it's really important as we're growing the women's game that we want to know what the talent looks like coming through and how do we identify it. So looking at what attributes and characteristics are required to be a coach, and who's thinking about coaching, who's already coaching, so that when roles are coming up, as they will do, and as the game grows and we get to that point, Patrick, where it's equal, that there are lots of roles available. So we want to prepare the coaches that we've identified, but we first of all need to identify them. So that was what we wanted to do. So, you know, the old traditional pyramid piece, you know, got a really large base, and then there'll be those that will come through the system. But who are they? What attributes have they got? How can we help them develop so that, as I say, when a role comes up, that we've got a really good pipeline of coaching talent with a big emphasis on females. So I think what Patrick and Lucia have talked about, I think is just so important. And it made me think, Patrick, about when you were saying about little tips. I remember I was on a course once and somebody used the phrase about who's in your boardroom. And I thought, oh, I like that. Who's in Audrey's boardroom? So who have I got? Who's talking up for me? Because I'll be dead honest, show my vulnerability here. I was a bit like, well, somebody will notice me, but we can't expect just to be noticed. So I think as we develop this pipeline of talent, we've got to get them to think about who's in your boardroom, who's going to be your sponsor when those opportunities arise. So, yeah.
I think, super inspiring to see how across, different industry sectors and experiences, the common themes are really, really common, and got energized from both Patrick and his, real life, personal and professional experience, and definitely, I mean, happy to have such a powerful, ally there, and I hope you can really be infectious. I know these days is a bad word, but in this case, I mean, we need to spread around this, advocacy, and I think Audrey, I mean, you really made me think, yes, how many stereotypes and we have, and your resilience and your commitment. I think it's really great, and I think what you are doing and thinking long term, right? We are here not for a sprint, but it's a marathon. So thinking succession planning is already okay. Maybe it's not now, but we're getting there. So I think this is very inspiring. I'll take it with me.
There's one thing I would say if I had a magic wand. So it would be, I'd say to Audrey, actually, with the challenge to find more female football coaches and have that big pipeline. My household is also a netball, so we're a football and a netball, and we love sport here. And so my wife's level 2 coach and the girls all play. And so in netball, we have the opposite problem, and there's not enough men. So there's only one male team, there's very few male coaches and officials, etc. So I just sit there and think, well, if I had a magic wand, I'd take all those brilliant female netball coaches who probably have multidisciplinary, sporting backgrounds for many of them as well. And I'd say, let's swap them with some of those football coaches and give them a sort of 6 weeks secondment. And I think the experience would be amazing for the male football coaches going to a female sport, and they would have to leave behind their tactics and all that stuff, and the females going to a more male-dominated sport or a different sport. I think it'd just be really fascinating to do some kind of experiment there. And it only occurred to me when you were talking about the struggle to find great female coaches, and I think that in netball there's a lot. So that's maybe a space to look. That's my magic wand. It's a gift. I don't know if it's any good to you, but that's the thought. And then one for the men listening in. So if you're a man and you want to be a bit more comfortable in your skin and know more about who you are and what's important, and maybe that will help you be a better ally to women, I recommend this book. I have no vested interest in it, but this book is a great book. I don't know if you can see it okay there. So it's a book called Manhood by Steve Biddulph, who's a world-renowned psychologist, family psychologist. He's written books for men, women, children, families, adoption, you name it. It's an excellent book. So if you're a man, buy it and read it, and it might help you become a better ally to women. And if you're a woman, then you could buy this for a man. And then that might help them be a better ally to you. So just a thought, I highly recommend it. It's one of the best books I've read in my entire life. So that's my parting thought. Thank you.
Gosh, if I had a magic wand for women in leadership, that kind of broad piece.
No pressure, Audrey, no pressure.
I know, gosh. I would love to see a female Prime Minister really changing and shaping what leadership is at the top. So that's that. And I'm not a political person, but I think the more we can see people in those kind of big, powerful positions, and well, I guess they're in the public eye, I think it just provides, and obviously in the States with a new vice president, I just think it's fabulous. So I think if a magic wand, particularly in football, that there would be a reverse, that I'd be getting people contacting me saying, Audrey, we've only had 4 applications from males, but we've had 96 from women. Gosh, that would be my magic wand. in specifically around football, because at the moment it's the other way around. So I'd love it to be that there were more females out there putting themselves forward full of confidence, and being given those opportunities to take them. And that I had a new problem, which was, how do we get more men into football? That would be an amazing situation to be in. So, and I talk for all sport, not just football, I think. So, and my takeaways got to be so many, to be honest. I've had brilliant reminders around sponsors and advocates and the work that both Patrick and Lucia are doing. It's really given me some thoughts as to, we've probably not emphasized that enough. So I think that for me, that's been a massive takeaway. And I love the idea of the learning labs. I like that in terms of bringing people together, and like we talk about communities of practice, but that opportunity to learn and share. I just think there's just still incredible amount of value in that. So yeah, but I could keep talking because there've been so many takeaways. So thank you.